Regional court in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu, has sentenced 4 senior health ministry officials to up to 18 years in prison for corruption and theft of public money. They were arrested in April on charges of embezzling official funds donated to curb the coronavirus outbreak. The country of 15 million people has so far confirmed about 3,269 COVID-19 infections, 93 deaths, and 2,396 recoveries, according to Johns Hopkins University in the United States of America. With elections postponed to next year, I spoke to Professor Abdi Ismail Samatar about the political dynamics within the region.
Prof. Abdi, thank you very much for joining us here on Newzroom Afrika. I mean, this week we saw the Somali government taking rather stringent and strong action against some of its top officials. I mean, we saw that some of the officials in the health ministry have literally been arrested and sent to prison for quite lengthy periods, related to corruption with regards to COVID-19 and even, the squandering of public funds. Ultimately, at the time that we find ourselves in, I mean, this strong response from government, what is it reflecting within that region?
I think if we are looking for a model in the East Africa, Great Lakes region of Africa, in terms of fighting corruption, and Rwanda will be the place to look at, and in Southern Africa, of course, it will be places like Botswana, among other places where I have worked. So I'm not surprised, nor do I think that these actions signal a serious engagement in fighting corruption in Somalia at all. I have spent 30 years studying that country, among other places in Africa. And it's, I think, a fluke, in my opinion, rather than a serious confrontation with the war on corruption in that country, because the whole governmental structure, from the presidency down to the provinces, is absolutely replete with corruption. That is the blood that runs the system, is corruption. So this is a way to tell the international community, look the other way rather than seriously engage with the Somali people themselves. So for instance, if I give you an example, a number of ventilators were brought to the country and was put in the few hospitals in Mogadishu. But this is about 4 months ago or 3 months ago. The presidency took some of those and kept them in the presidency itself. So if that is not a signal of corruption at the highest level of government, I don't know what it is.
I'm looking at some of the other instances, that have occurred this year, particularly related to Somalia. I mean, we saw that, so amongst these corruption scandals that have come out, we've also seen that elections have been postponed for another year. Ultimately, I mean, how is the West, how have international organizations and even continental organizations received this? What does it do then, for the country, looking at the issues that continue to plague it, as you mentioned earlier on, but also going forward in attempting to create some stability somewhat?
Liz, one of the lessons South Africa can teach Somalia before we go to the international community and the West is that at the time of the transition, when there was the negotiation between the liberation movements and the apartheid government, one of the things that I think legitimately and rightly and morally correctly that the liberation movement told the apartheid government is that the country is not going to be divided into tribal fiefdoms. For instance, the Bantustans only glorified this in the form of sort of the poor country, the English country, the Zulu country, the Xhosa country, and all of that stuff. That was rejected, and to, I think, good effect, because the people of South Africa collectively own the country rather than into small fiefdoms. What you have here in Somalia is the leadership, the political leadership, and the warlords have agreed with the international community to balkanize the country into the ethnic fiefdoms. So the people cannot move around the country and claim that they are collective citizens. So that's number one. And the international community and the West have condoned this. And that's the source of the corruption that we are talking about. That's number one. The African Union, by and large, has taken its cues from the international community or the Western world, as the euphemism goes. And so I don't think the international community is serious about helping the Somali people. I don't think the African Union is serious about helping the Somali people, because if they were, they will look at the models of success in Africa, in countries where there has been a civil war, and they will have used those lessons to help the Somalis, which are ethnically the most homogeneous country in the continent.
So, Prof, in the same breath, though, I mean, we also saw that the international community and some of the countries have also scrapped Somalia's debt, citing that they did make the necessary reforms, for much of its debt to be scrapped. In view of that support coming through from the international community and just juxtaposing it with what you said, I mean, what is then working in the country at this point?
You see, look at the way the debt relief works. The 4 billion or so that the old regime in the country, the dictatorship, which the international community supported in the 1980s and the late 70s and the 1980s, has not been written off yet. What has been agreed upon is a process which the government of Somalia must take, steps it must take, in order for that agreement to become effective. So that has not been forgiven yet. It's in the process. And if those agreements work, then the relief will come. So that's the first thing. The second thing to note about Somalia, what works, is that Somali people, much like other African people, are incredibly resilient people. Without the government for almost 30 years, they have built some schools, they have built hospitals, the business community has been working exceptionally hard. And so you will see students from Somali schools that are run by communities who are becoming internationally competitive. So, they say if you give them an arm, they will take the whole body. So if the Somali are given any opportunity, I have absolutely zero doubt that they will compete with any African group or any international community agents. But the question is, can those people who have been providing services for the Somali people, the business community, the religious community, school teachers and whatnot, can they get the leg up in order to be able to move their country to the next step? I don't think the African Union and the international community is giving that kind of help.
And speaking of some of the key drivers of that fragility that the country is experiencing, I mean, we're looking at how Somalia also relies on international bodies for funding and support. I'm looking at that long-standing battle between Islamist extremists. Perhaps that was also a reason cited for the delaying of the elections that was set to take place in November. I mean, ultimately, what does the AU, what does the international community need to do to support the region in the fight against these extremists at large?
Yeah, I mean, what is necessary, first of all, there has been no agreement as to whether the election is going to be sort of delayed or not. There is haggling between the sort of provincial fiefdoms and the central government fiefdom. They are all fiefdoms. And so they have been moving back and forth, agreeing and disagreeing. So there has been no decision made on whether to postpone the elections or not yet. There may be something happening in the next month that will clarify that. So what the international community could do and must do, in my opinion, if they are interested in the human welfare of the people of that country, the Somalis, what they will do is to tell the warlords and the political sort of tribalists that the world is not going to support this, and that the way to move forward is to create a system of institutions in the country. And that's where the AU, the South African government, and others can be helpful. Institutions that are accountable to the local people rather than to the political authorities in the provinces or the national government. So if that is not done, what we will have is a recirculation, if you like, of the same failed policies, the same failed agendas of the last 30 years, and the Somali people will be paying the brunt of that. And so if we are serious about this as an international community, and particularly the African community as in the form of the AU and the South African government, then this is the time to make the demands, and I have no doubt that the Somali people will rally around that kind of an agenda, which is civic-oriented, which is reconstruction-oriented, which is oriented in sort of creating a civic body for Somali politics. But that has not been done yet. Your listeners need to know Somalis were I wrote a book called Africa's First Democrats. And it was in Somalia. Now Somalia is the basket case. But from 1959, 60 to 1970, they were the best practitioners of democracy in Africa. And rather than looking at Botswana or South Africa, if you want to look at the history of successful democracies in the continent and the practice of democracy with very low levels of corruption, Somalia is the place to look at for historical experience.
So, Prof, just to wrap up this conversation, ultimately looking at the current realities that Somalians are facing during these unprecedented times. I mean, I was just looking at the manner in which the cases were recorded, the numbers that have been coming out. I mean, how true is this reflection of what is happening? And in terms of the realities that the ordinary citizens are facing, what do those situations look like on the ground?
You know, if you look at the whole continent of Africa and you compare that to the rest of the world, 74% of the African people are younger than 30 years of age. Somalia is even more so than the rest of the continent. So the vast majority of the population, 70+%, are very young. And so it seems to me that although I don't think there is any accurate reporting of the corona cases in the country, there are no hospitals across the country, so who's going to detect that? But the deaths have been relative.
I know that was Professor Abdi Ismail Samatar, of course, just chatting about the recent reports coming through from Somalia this week, where we saw top officials being arrested over corruption and theft of public money.